Oops, I didn't do that. Welcome to the 2024 Joint Celebration produced by the Inland Valley Storytellers and the Contra Costa Tale Spinners. My name is John St. Clair, and I will be your Zoom host for the evening. And I want to let you know a few rules. The main thing is that everybody should be muted unless you are telling a story. So that will make for no interruptions for our storytellers tonight. And you can put things into the chat section if you want, but we probably aren't going to really, if you have a question, probably won't respond till the very end. If you have questions of individual tellers, we'll not interrupt the program to do that, but put that at the end. And so a little background here. In 1988, Tellabration was born. This event, dedicated to storytelling and story listening, was the brainchild of J.G. Papa Pinkerton. J.G. was a board member of both the National and the Connecticut Storytelling organizations, as well as a Connecticut storyteller. His vision was to create a fundraising event that would also introduce new listeners to storytelling. That first year, Tellabration took place in 6 towns across the state of Connecticut. The following year, Texas and Missouri joined in producing Tellabration, and since then, many, many other places have joined in. Wherever a Tellabration happens, audiences discover the delight of story listening. The National Storytelling Network is the sponsor of Tellabration events today, and the Storytelling Association of California has been the sponsor of the joint Tellabration events starting in 2020 when COVID shut down all of our in-person events. This event is free, but donations would be welcome by both organizations. And right now, I am going to paste in the links to do those donations if you so desire. So I'm putting in the StoryNet one first. And whoops, it went to the waiting room. I want everyone in meeting. Let me try that again. There we go. And then second, I'm going to put in the link to SAC, the Storytelling Association of California. So those links are now there. And I will do that again because if we have other people join, the way Zoom works, they can't see what was put in the chat before they join. So I'll do it again at the end of the evening. I'll put in those links in case you are interested in donating to either NSN or SAC. It is now my pleasure to introduce Liz Nichols. Born and raised in New York City, Liz Nichols got lost in the folklore and mythology section of the public library at age 10 and hasn't found her way out yet. Liz lives in Oakland and has been a co-host of Contra Costa Tale Spinners for the past 10 years. Oh, I did forget to do something, didn't I?
I don't know.
I should have had you up there while I was introducing you.
Here I am, John. No problem.
I'll take me off the screen and then you can take it away from here.
Okay. But I'm going to introduce, well, whatever. I realize you're going to come back on, right?
Yeah, but I'll do that.
Okay. So hi, everybody. Welcome. So happy to see you all here on behalf of, in our case, Contra Costa Tale Spinners. And I want to read to you. I just also want to say this is the first Tellabration that Contra Costa Tale Spinners has been involved in our whole history, as far as I know. I have not been here from the beginning. You'll hear more about who's been here from the beginning later in this evening. But thank you. I want a big thank you to Inland Valley Storytellers who have been doing joint Tellabrations and in-person Tellabrations for quite a number of years, for partnering with us and bringing us into this wonderful tradition. So speaking of tradition, one of the traditions of Tellabration is to read the Tellabration Proclamation, and I get to do that. In the name of storytelling, on this day, the 21st of November, 2024, we hereby proclaim it to be Tellabration, the worldwide event of storytelling. As J.G. Paw Pinkerton once said, may what the tellers share bring joy to many people, and may the listeners come to know that through storytelling, we can draw closer together in peace and in friendship and in love. We celebrate the connection that stories give us. And let the stories begin. Ba-ba-ba-ba! And now here coming back is John St. Clair, who is the leader of Inland Valley Storytellers. He has been the leader since 2007. And he has told a Tellabration story every year since 2003, up until this year. And he is going to be the MC for all the tellers from Inland Valley Storytellers. And he's going to introduce the first of them. Let's get started.
Okay, so it is my pleasure to introduce Ron Evans. And Ron is a native New Englander and moved to Claremont, California in 2007. He and his wife, Janet, were present for the very first Tellabration, which was in Connecticut in 1988, which is quite a distinction. Ron joined Inland Valley Storytellers in 2009 and has performed in most Inland, you know what, I'm going to say IVS from now on instead of saying Inland Valley Storytellers. He performed at most IVS concerts since the spring concert of 2009. So, Ron, tell us your story.
I'm watching Zoom on TV on my phone. I mean, on my.
Ron, are you there?
What?
What is it? Storytelling?
Yeah, it's the Tellabration. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I did see that.
Okay, there's no background noise now. Okay, Ron, go for it. Oh, Ron, you are muted. Uh-oh. He was working fine before. And he must not be able to hear me either. Where is he, Ron?
Ron, can you hear us? We can't hear you.
Okay.
Say something to us.
Yeah. No sound, no sound.
Hmm.
See if I
Still
can
no
come right in
sound. There we go.
better. Can
Ah,
you hear me now?
now, yes, we heard you. Can you hear us? He can't
1, 2,
hear us.
3. I can just barely hear you, John. This is awkward because earlier, as we were getting ready, I could hear you quite well.
Yeah, well, now we can hear you quite well.
Well, then I'll risk trying to get through if I can. Awkward as it may be. We'll let it go for what it can be, and I know that you'll shout if you can't hear me. I'm turned up as far as I can go. What I'd really like to do is to tell you a story, of course, and the story that I have in mind is entitled Strange Meeting. Some of you may recall that that is the name of a poem by a Welsh poet, Wilfred Owen, and it was about the Great War, that which we understand as World War I, a time when everything changed, really, and the modern era began. But today, I'd like to think about not the then and there so much as the issues of the here and now. For we too live in a strange and stressful time, and who does not long for that once and future time when, in the words of the prophet, the day will come when true peace is so true that even the lion and the lamb will lie down together without any fear. Of course, given our world, I find that a hard thing to envision. Such were just not intended to get along as this. Or, in the words of the famous theologian Woody Allen, the lion and the lamb may nap close by one another, but only one of them will sleep more soundly than the other. But still, stranger things have happened. And our yearnings for true peace, as universal as they are timeless, they run as far as the Golden Rule, of course, all the way to Rodney King's still haunting question, why can't we all just get along? Which brings to mind that here, electronic tonight, there is a time, albeit an ocean away, when there once lived two men, each brought up in a privileged home, each provided with every single advantage. Each of the fathers, their fathers, were in the foreign service, and each for a time lived in different European capitals and became fluent in several different languages. Each attended, as time went on, one of England's so-called public schools, and then one went on to Oxford and the other on to study at Cambridge. And each of these young men was as devoted to his nation's highest ideals and aspirations and survival as he possibly could be. But there was a problem. The problem was that the nations to which they were both devoted were at war with each other. So, for more than 3 years, one of them, a young British officer, was secretly schooled in every detail of the ways of the German high command. Yes, unusual. The purpose of this was to one day drop him behind enemy lines to learn what he could about one particular Nazi field officer might know about Operation Overlord, what we all came to know in time as the code name for the Normandy invasion. The Allied forces had to have this vital information to determine whether there was any hope of the needed success of this long-planned invasion, as being a surprise, the only way that it would work. Everything hinged on the Brit linking up with one German officer, of whom intelligence reports had confirmed had very close connections with Berlin. And so, with superb planning and a huge amount of luck, all went as planned, and the connection was made. The ruse was a seemingly casual, late night encounter in a small cafe in a tiny village in occupied France. Every detail was carefully thought out, and every contingency precisely worked through, right down to the German officer's passion for a rare, high-octane reserve Napoleon brandy, 3 bottles of which the British officer just happened to liberate, so he said, from a French Vichy officer back in Paris. Yes, the Brit was as subtle and as smooth as the brandy itself. Now, I'll spare us the countless details about how many late night difficulties were involved in all of this contact, but it was made. and all the near misses that could have ended the meetup even before it began, but everything did work out. In fact, the proper contact at the proper place and with the proper officer was made. Even so, in their long night's camaraderie of carousing and conversation in that little cafe, as they together polished off first 2 bottles and then started on the third, the British learned much about the German officer's life and family. And previously unknown to the British that the wife of his enemy and foe had been killed in an Allied bombing of Dresden, just as his wife and daughter had died in a German bombing of London, that which we know as the Blitz. Yet, unshaken and true to his purpose, he gleaned just enough more to know that, yes, the Germans did, in fact, know that an invasion was coming, and soon, but not one inkling of where or exactly when it would all take place. So, also, he was pleased to learn that there was much speculation about various places along the coast, most of them north of the intended true location in Normandy, that were more highly favored by Berlin. The direct and shortest route to Normandy was thought a possibility by many in Berlin, but most dismissed it as well, just simply too obvious. So, toward the end of this strange meeting, and just before dawn, with both men a little wobbly on their feet, those mortal enemies gave every appearance of being not only comrades in arms, but now long and fast friends, parted with of Heil Hitler and started off units encamped on opposite sides of the village. Beneath his superbly tailored, bemetaled Nazi uniform, the British officer smiled to himself as a little light-headed from the brandy binge, of course, but exhilarated by the success of his now near completed mission. So now, only one thing remained, a yet unprogrammed but very personal vendetta before the prearranged rendezvous with the resistance, the historic and heroic French underground, who would send his information speedily on to London. You see, as he walked along the valley lane, after they had parted, he slowly moved his hand to smoothly unsheathe the German Luger revolver to rid the world of this prepossessing Nazi. First, of course, carefully affixing a silencer to the gun barrel, but only then did he realize, for the last hour or more, both men had been conversing entirely in English. He spun around to see his enemy and prey standing not 10 meters away with his hands on his hips, smiling at him. But before raising his now unsheathed weapon, the German officer lifted his right arm, and not with the weapon in hand to shoot, but to salute. And not in the outstretched way of the Nazis would in the Third Reich, but rather in that tempered steel manner that the Brits did in the British Empire. And then, bang! A single shot in deadly close range, and they dove into the shadows and staggering, stumbling, heart-pounding run in a darkness of oblivion. And of course, we all know the end of the story. Well, for here we are today, speaking English, or at least our curious American adaptation of it, rather than speaking in Deutsch, aren't we? And that would seem to be the end of the story of this amazing, long ago, strange encounter, a true once upon a time event, as it were. Except for what happened to those two unlikely characters, both of whom did, in fact, survive the war. Though neither knew of the other's survival, each remained haunted by that all-night encounter for more than 60 years, until 19 years ago, this very week, by the way, when they met again in Geneva, Switzerland, when each was presented with one half of a single award that they would share together. One of only 3 such citations ever given by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. For you see, after the war, and quite unknown to the other, each man devoted the rest of his professional life and the better part of a considerable family fortune to aid the terrible plight of war widows and orphans in Europe and in the United Kingdom, respectively. One day, a lion and a lamb will lie down together. Only a myth, a bit of a lyrical poetry, perhaps, something we dust off every once in a while. Or maybe a foretelling of the longed for time when all peoples of every nation, tradition, and condition shall yet live in true peace in a world not just for some of us, but one that is truly just for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ron. Thank you for reminding us how history can speak to us today. All right. Well, at this point in the program, I was planning as the MC for Tale Spinners to introduce Ben Tucker as our first storyteller. But unfortunately, I have to tell you that Ben can't be with us tonight. He had a minor surgery. He is fine, but his recovery is not going quite as quickly as, you know, how those surgeons tell you, oh, you'll be up instantly, and you're not. So instead, I would like to share a story with you that is not quite as old as the story Ron just told, but it is a story called The Huckabuck Family and How They Raised Popcorn in Alaska, in Nebraska. Not in Alaska, and quit and came back. And it is one of the rutabaga stories written by the famous 20th century Midwestern poet and author, Carl Sandburg. And since it's over 100 years old, it's in the public domain now. And I loved hearing all these stories when I was a child, and I still love them. I hope you enjoy. Well, the Huckabuck family consisted of a father, Jonas Huckabuck, the mother, Mama Huckabuck, and their pony-faced daughter, who they called Pony Huckabuck. Now, they lived on a farm in Nebraska, and they raised popcorn. And one year, the crop was so good that there was popcorn ears in all the barns and cribs, in all the sheds and shacks, in every crack and corner of the farm. And Jonas said, I think we have enough popcorn this year to feed all the popcorn poppers and all the friends and relations of all the popcorn poppers in this whole United States. And so it was a special year, but it was also special because Pony was finally old enough to make a squash pie for Thanksgiving all by herself. And so she had a secret in one of those cribs, in one of those barns. Under the popcorn she had from her garden a big round squash, a fat yellow squash, a rich squash, all speckled with specks of gold. And when it was time to prepare for Thanksgiving, she took it into the kitchen and she took a big, sharp, shining knife and she cut it right in half. And when it split open, the inside was rich and golden like the outside. And then she had that job that I don't particularly enjoy when you're carving a pumpkin or you're preparing a squash. You know how you, whether with a spoon or with your hands, you have to pull out that stringy, slimy, seedy, slippery stuff. And so she was picking and pulling and she felt something different. And it was, she saw a shine of silver. And when she plucked it out, it was a silver buckle. And she ran and said, "Mama, Mama, look, a silver buckle." And Mama Huckabuck took it and said, "Yes, that is a Chinese silver slipper buckle." "Well, what's that, Mama?" "Well, that is a sign and a signal. You see, that means our luck is going to change, but we don't know whether for good or for bad." Well, they found out soon enough, because that very night, a fire broke out in one of the barns. And all night long, it just burned slowly, but the popcorn began to pop. It popped so much it poured out onto the ground. When they woke up in the morning, it looked like that first early snow of autumn. And all day long, that fire continued to burn. The popcorn popped. And by the time Pony was going out to the barn at dinner time to check on the animals, it was up to here. And it continued all that night. And when they all woke up the next morning and looked out their second-story bedroom windows, well, the popcorn was practically up to the windowsill. And Jonas said, "Look, we grow popcorn, but this is too much. We have to leave the farm. We're going to leave and we're not going to come back until the wind blows all the popcorn away and until we get another sign and another signal that it's time to come back." And so they left, and they traveled for 1 year, 2 years, 3. They went to Oskaloosa, Iowa, and lived there for a while. They went to Paducah, Kentucky, and Defiance, Ohio, and Peoria, Illinois. They went to Indianapolis, Indiana. They even went as far as Walla Walla, Washington. Now, the very last place they went in those 3 years was the best place. It was Elgin, Illinois. And in Elgin, Illinois, Jonas, who had many different jobs in all these places, he got a job as a watchman, watching the watches in a watch factory. And that was a proud year. Pony would come watch him after school sometimes. And she felt so proud watching her father watch the watches in the watch factory. But Thanksgiving was coming around. She wanted to make a pie she could be proud of. She went to all the grocery stores. She had none of her own garden until she found just the right squash. It was a big round squash. It was a fat yellow squash. It was a rich squash, all covered with spotted with specks of gold. And when she brought it home and she took out a big, sharp, shining knife and she cut it in half, well, it was just as rich on the inside. And when she pulled out that sticky, stringy, slimy stuff, she felt something. You know what she felt. It was a silver buckle. It was a Chinese silver slipper buckle. And she ran and said, "Mama, look, it's the mate. It means it's the sign. It's the signal. Our luck has changed. Yoo-hoo," she said. And Mama and Papa said, "Yes, it's time to go back to the farm." And so they went. And when they got there, indeed, in 3 years, the wind had blown away all the popcorn. Now, as you can imagine, in 3 years, the farm needed lots of work, but that's good to do in the winter. But in the spring, it was time to decide what to plant. Pony said, let's plant tomatoes and beans. And Jonas said, yes, let's plant potatoes and squash for sure. And Mama Huckabuck said, yes, and you know what? Let's plant corn. Let's plant sweet corn. And yes, sir, let's plant white corn. Let's even plant that Indian corn that's so beautiful on the Thanksgiving table. But let's never, ever, ever plant popcorn again. And they did not. Now that year for Thanksgiving, Pony made her squash pie. And she was so proud. And she was also proud because for that special Thanksgiving dinner where everybody dressed up a little fancy, she had on her feet 2 new black slippers. And on each one, there was a Chinese silver slipper buckle. They were mates. She always made a squash pie for Thanksgiving, sometimes even for Christmas or for New Year's. And her friends would all always ask her for the recipe, and she would explain how you had to have just the right kind of squash and all the other steps. But then she would tell them, be careful, because when you cut open that squash, you just don't know. It might change your luck, and you won't know till after, whether for good or for bad. And that's the story of how the Huckabuck family raised popcorn in Nebraska and quit and came back, by Carl Sandburg.
Thank you. Thank you. That was great. Great story. I'd never heard that one before.
Yeah, it's in the Rutabaga Pigeons, so it's in the second book.
All right.
All right.
Thank you very much. Okay, so now it is my pleasure to introduce to you Ron Chick. Now, Ron Chick is a retired teacher and was telling stories in classroom settings for over 30 years. Now that he is retired, Ron has the freedom to go most anywhere for the opportunity to tell and teach the art of the spoken word. He actively participates in many storytelling groups throughout Southern California and beyond. Ron joined the Inland Valley Storytellers in 2010 and has performed in every IVS concert since the spring of 2010. So, Ron, tell us your story.
Trolls. Historically and in fiction, trolls were very different than what most people think of as trolls today. In modern times, when you refer to somebody as a troll, you're talking about somebody who creates a fake identity for themselves online and peddles nonsense or sells things that aren't there, cheaters and so forth. But real trolls are mostly extinct. They're only the few shapeshifters are left. And they're finding life ever more difficult. For you see, a troll's primary goal is to acquire wealth. Greed should be their only name because that is their only motivation. They do not get along well with other people or other trolls, because they're always looking for a chance to acquire more wealth, more power. But as modern life has gone along, it's very difficult for trolls to keep living where they are. They don't age the way we do. So as they live in a community, they do makeup and things to try and make do, but mostly they need to change shapes again. Trolls have one significant weakness. They are required by their nature to spend some time each month, usually in the dark of the moon, in contact with a granite, a big piece of rock, preferably one that has deep roots into the earth, for that's where their greatest strength would lie. His human name doesn't matter. Phineas thought of himself as Phineas Stone, although he had never assumed that identity publicly. And he knew he had a problem. He had gold, but he couldn't come forward and say it was his because where did you get it? Did you pay your taxes on it? He had other treasures stored in different places in different ways. But his character that he was then living was growing, would have been growing quite old, and he was still quite vigorous. And he knew that eventually someone would catch on. And so he began to look for a way to assume a new shape and identity. Nothing presented itself for some time. But there was a young man named Jonathan, who was sort of a child of the whole town. His actual physical parents had passed away in an accident when he was young, and they'd been adopted by two community members who were elderly, and they raised him into his high school years when one of them died of a heart attack, and the other decided she simply must go live with her children in another state. And so Jonathan was once again sort of taken in by the community. His football coach, who saw his potential as an athlete, brought him into his home. And now Jonathan had a new home, but not really a new family. His one living relative was an uncle who he had met several times when he was quite small, but not in many years. Then word came one day that this uncle had passed away and had an estate that he was going to leave to young Jonathan. This was several states away, and of course, Jonathan didn't have much money. People talked about fundraising or sponsoring or what other sorts of things, but that was what Phineas thought of as the perfect opportunity. For he was known to be a man of wealth. And he went forward and said, I have several things across the country I should attend to, more or less that direction. How about if I take you to where your inheritance is? We'll have to make several stops along the way. I've got things to attend to, but you can ride along with me and we'll stay in hotels and get to know each other even better. Well, of course, Jonathan was delighted. This was an answer to his immediate problems, and so they took off. The troll drove with great care in a fine newish Cadillac, and he meandered around the country, looking at different properties, going to things, of course, for what he was waiting for was the dark of the moon. He planned his journey carefully so that he would be not too far from where Jonathan was going to have to go on the night of the dark of the moon. And he went to a property that he had owned for many years, that was all run down, and said, well, it's late and it's a beautiful night out tonight. The stars will be bright. We'll just camp sort of here tonight, and we'll go on to your final destination tomorrow where we'll part company. Jonathan, of course, agreed to this. They went into the shack and they sort of lay down on blankets on the floor, and Jonathan drifted off to sleep. And then suddenly there was a cold, cold hand that had grabbed a hold of his arm and was dragging him out of the cabin. Jonathan looked over and he saw that it was supposedly his friend, but his arm wasn't a human arm anymore. It was much more muscular and was made of granite stone, and his hand wrist was encircled in stone and he could not pull away. He begged, he pleaded, he wanted an explanation, but the troll did not answer. He took him out up on top of a great piece of granite with a flat top, forced him to the ground, and literally formed handcuffs into the stone for him to use. Then he cut off Jonathan's night clothes. He pulled them away from him, took off his own clothes, lay down on the rock, and began to change. He still had 2 hands, 2 feet, 2 arms, 2 legs, massive fingers, great fields of money, but his face changed the most. It began to elongate and get longer and longer and thinner, and his mouth went forward, and slowly out of that mouth came two little tendrils. The last thing Jonathan ever saw was those things cracking down on his face, and he knew no more. When dawn came, a perfect replica of Jonathan was lying there, free on the stone. And around the stone was very fine granite sand, for the two sizes hadn't matched perfectly. Now Jonathan rose up, put on some of Jonathan's clothes from the car, got in the Cadillac, drove into town, and introduced himself to the lawyer who was going to handle things. Who would doubt him? He looked like Jonathan. He sounded like Jonathan. He had some vague memories of things he had done in this community as a young child when his parents were still alive. And some people remembered some of those things with him. No one had any doubt that he was the legitimate heir. And so he now had a house and some money, not a massive fortune, but he could start bringing his treasure in from places it was hidden. Pleasantville was a wonderful town. Some things were very unique about it. For one thing, it seemed like they had no housing shortage per se. Everybody seemed to have some place to stay, though not all of them were fine and beautiful. Everyone seemed to have food to eat. And some of the conflicts that happen in so many communities didn't seem to come up. The four major church groups agreed to have events, either Saturday or Sunday, the first Saturday or Sunday of the month, depending upon their faith. And everybody would come to these big parties, social gatherings, and compete with each other. And they didn't have religious conflicts at all. What's more, there were a variety of racial groups here. And they all seem to get along just fine, thinking of themselves as Pleasantville citizens and thinking they're the luckiest people on the planet to live in such a wonderful place. Everyone was content and happy, it seemed. And Phineas, couldn't stand it. How can a troll live in a place where there's no conflict and no anger and no one teasing anyone? It's just horrible, and I don't know what I can do to change it. I look like a 20-year-old young man. I have the it was awful. He began to watch more closely. He noticed that all the major families seemed to get along well, but one family was a little bit different. Not that they behaved differently, they were friendly and competitive and had a lot of fun, but a lot of them had red hair, and a few of those even had green eyes. And he thought, I can work with that. This was a large family. Several generations had lived there in the valley for a long time. And they suddenly began hearing rumors that there were things not going well, and whispers were happening around them. They didn't have any idea where these things were coming from, but suddenly they had problems from their neighbors. Their children were having problems at school. No one knew what was going on. No one could trace anything back to any particular source, but they were getting fairly worried. They had a young man who was the kind of kid who got along well with lots of people, but his great passion was astronomy. He loved being out at dark, particularly when there would be some celestial event to observe. And he knew all of them, all the constellations, all the major changes, everything that would come up in the phases of the moon. He knew it all. But not many others shared his passion. So it was not unusual for him to be out late at night. One night, he had been out watching the stars, when he saw his new neighbor, Jonathan, striding purposely through the fields, not going along the roadways, going easily over fences that would be hard for him to jump, and moving rapidly toward the sides of the valley. Curious, he followed, and he saw him come to a large glacial rock. Everybody had climbed that rock from time to time in their lives. But what would you be doing that at dark of the night like this? He was curious and he moved forward, and the Jonathan took off his clothes and lay down on the bare stone. And it was a cool night, not frigid, but cold. And then he began to change. The young man came forward. He watched as the form known as Jonathan changed into its troll form, deriving new strength and power from the power of the granite rock beneath him. Of course, the young man hurried back home. He didn't know what to do. He didn't understand how it could happen. He wasn't even sure he believed he had seen it himself. And Jonathan continued his life and was getting more and more involved in the community. He was spending money on projects and fitness. He was sponsoring things happening, trying to build up his power in the community while constantly whispering about young Douglas's family. He didn't know what to do. Didn't know what he believed. Wasn't sure he believed any of it. And so time went on. But once again, the next month, he was out late at night, watching the stars in the dark of the moon. And he saw Jonathan once again heading away toward the great rock. He didn't know quite what to do, but he knew who to talk to. He went and knocked on his uncle's door. And he said, "There's something very strange happening. I saw it last month. I'm sure it's happening this month. It's some kind of creature or transfer. I don't know what to make of it." His uncle said, "Douglas, you are a good boy. If you want me to come see this with you, I will come. But perhaps we should wake your father and grandfather. The four of us might do this together. What do you think of that?" And so the family was roused. Out into the edge of the valley, out toward the great glacial rock, the family went. Three men and a young man, all creeping forward to where they could see this strange creature lying still as stone, made of stone perhaps, but clearly alive, forming below them. They knew evil when they saw evil. They rushed forward and began to bang on parts of it. And eventually they broke the creature apart and waited for dawn. And when dawn came, all that was left was some of the finest granite dust and sand you've ever seen. So if you go to Pleasantville, you'll see them on the first weekend of every month, celebrating their wonderful lives as a community. And some of them will point to a statue of a young man named Douglas who may or may not have saved his whole family, his whole community from a real troll. By the Dark of the Moon, a story created by yours truly.
Thank you, Ron. So original. So original. Okay. We have lots more stories in store. And from the original to the traditional. So our next storyteller representing Tale Spinners is Renu Narayan. And let's get her. Here she is. Oh. And Renu is a freelance storyteller and trainer, and she lives in southern India. She was born in the state of Kerala, and now she lives in Chennai in Tamil Nadu. And She has performed in India, in overseas, and she has a bi-monthly gathering or program she calls Katha Potpourri, and that hosts storytelling for children and adults. And so she tells to people, and then she also has a passion to encourage other people to explore their own communication skills. And the thing is that through the magic of Zoom, and because of the pandemic and the way we all went on Zoom, she's become a regular, one of our most regular storytellers at our swap in Northern California. So, so good to have you. Tell us a story, Rina. And you need to unmute.
Sorry. Thank you, Liz. There was once a chief who ruled over a vast land. There were mountains in the north and deserts in the south, plains in the east and forests in the west. She always made it a point to travel far and wide to meet the people of her land. She spoke to them and she listened carefully with attention. She listened to understand. And because she listened so carefully and listened to understand, she found solutions for their problems. The people loved her. They always waited for her to visit them. And whenever there was news that she was planning to visit them, they would prepare a huge feast. And they would be singing and dancing till late in the night. And every time the chief would feel blessed and grateful for the love that she received. One night, she went to bed in her house, tired after a long day's work. At night, she somehow felt that there was a cool breeze that left caressing her face. She turned this side and that side. But when she woke up in the morning, she found that nothing had changed. Her door was locked, the window slightly open. But when she looked around, she found a tiny little seed at the end of her bed. She picked up the seed and looked at it. It looked very ordinary. But something made her feel that this was something special. So she picked up a pot, put in some rich, dark soil, made a hole in the middle, and then put the seed inside, covered it, watered it, and put it in a place where there's enough sunlight. Every day she looked at it. And one day, a tiny little shoot had come up. Every single day, the shoot grew longer and longer and longer, and soon it had spread itself out all over the ground. After a few weeks, there was a flower. A few more weeks, there was a tiny little gourd. She kept watching it, and soon the gourd became bigger and bigger. It was round and shiny and golden yellow. A day came and it was time to harvest it. So she took a sharp knife and sliced off the vine. She picked up the gourd, cut a neat hole on the top, removed the top, and scooped out all what was inside. And she placed it in the bright sunlight. It lay there for a few days till it had turned hard. The surface was smooth and shiny. She took it inside and she put her hand inside. And when she put her hand in, suddenly a wish came into her head. And when she took out her hand, she realized that her wish had been answered. She knew then that it was a magical gourd. So every day she put her hand in, she took something out, but she always made it a point to put something back in. She knew that the gourd was special. And she decided that she wouldn't use it just like that. She would keep it for special occasions and use it only when her people needed it. And so she placed it very carefully on a wooden table at the end of her bed. Every day she would clean it, polish it, but put it back in place. One day there was news of a skirmish in the eastern part of the land. And so she set off to resolve the dispute. She didn't know that 3 pairs of eyes were looking to see when she would go. There were 3 brothers who saw an opportunity. They had heard rumors of this magical gourd, and they spoke about among themselves. Imagine if it is true. Imagine we will be the richest men in this land, they said. and off they went to the chief's house. They broke open into the house and went inside. They searched here, there, everywhere, but they couldn't find the gold. Finally, the eldest walked into her bedroom, and there was the gold in plain sight. He picked it up, wrapped it up in cloth, put it inside his bag, and off they went. They lived inside the forest in a tiny wooden shack. They went in and nailed the entrance so that no one could disturb them. The eldest said, "My turn first," put his hand in and said, "I want 10 gold and coins." When he took his hand out, he was almost blinded. There were the biggest, shiniest gold coins. Seeing this, the second brother pushed him out of the way, put his hand in and said, "I want the biggest, finest diamond in the world." And when he took his hand out, there it was, shining so brightly he could even see his own face in the diamond. The third brother immediately pushed the second one out and put his hand in and said, "I want the shiniest, sharpest sword in the world." And when he pulled his hand out, there it was. Handle made of gold, studded with precious gems, and the blade so sharp, he almost cut his finger on it. The oldest brother looked at the other two and said, "What are these gold coins? Useless. Look what my brothers have got." So he put his hand once again and kept asking. They kept taking turns, taking treasure after treasure out of the gold. The gold started getting weaker and weaker and weaker. But they kept plundering, kept taking, and she kept giving. Finally, it was too much, and the gold shattered into 54 pieces right there on that wooden table. The brothers saw this and said, "Oh, what happened?" And they started accusing each other. You're the one. You took too much. You shouldn't have taken so much. You kept asking. You're so greedy." And then soon words turned into punches. They started punching and hitting one another. And they didn't realize that the treasure that they had taken had all piled up. And suddenly the treasure started to shake and tremble and fell on top of the 3 men, pinning them to the ground. In the meantime, the chief had returned to her house. And the moment she saw that the gold was missing, she was horrified. She immediately sent her men out to look for the gold. They went all over the land searching. One group went into the forest, and there one of them saw a small shed and this light, shimmering light coming out of the little cracks in the wood. He tried knocking, he tried pushing in the door. Finally, he called more people and they started stripping the wood off. That's when they found the 3 bodies of the men. And there were the pieces of the gold. They picked up all the pieces, put them in a bag, and took it back to the chief. The chief saw the broken gold. She was heartbroken, but she was not someone who could give up easily. So she started piecing the gold together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 30, 40, 50, 51, 52, 53. There was one small piece missing. And the chief said, "Where is that piece? Go, find it." And so the people went. They looked everywhere, but that little piece was nowhere to be found. The chief refused to leave her homestead. She said, "I will not leave this place now." Skirmishes came up in the east, in the west. People sent messages to her asking her to come and resolve the problems, but she refused to step out of the house. So once again, people set out, a small group. They went back into the forest. They looked up in the trees in case the wind had taken the piece up. They looked all over. A year and a day went by. And finally, one of them found it embedded in the soil. He picked it up, ran back to the chief and gave it to her. She looked at it and she put it back in place. And now the gold was back, whole and strong again. The chief was very happy. She picked it up and put it up in the highest point in the land. And then she told her people, "This gold is important. Every time you leave the land or come back to the land, look at the gold. The gold represents us, represents the world. You can take whatever you want from it. But remember to put something back." That's the end of the story. You're muted.
Unmute. There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you so much, Renew. That was a great story. And I love how you make it so animated. You have a great style of storytelling that just brings the story to life. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so our next storyteller, I need to add the spotlight, is Adrienne Lowry. And she's a member of the Inland Valley Storytellers, and she's been a storyteller since the first day they let her stand in front of a captive audience of freshman writing students while working on her PhD at USC. But a more formal storyteller with more willing audiences over the last 20 years. She has sung and acted on Southern California stages, including Renaissance Fair, and loves to learn the stories of peace, justice, and smart women. Adrienne joined the Inland Valley Storytellers in 2011 and has performed in every IVS concert since the spring of 2012. So, Adrienne, tell us a story.
Thank you. Well, we're heading into a holiday season, and there are some holiday stories, seasonal stories that are so magical that you almost need to hear them before the season begins, because there's something in them that'll get you through the season. And some of you have heard me tell this story. It's one of my favorites because we all know the Christmas story. We've heard it, at least in pop culture and even Peanuts cartoons and, every possible form of it. And we hear about the three wise men who came from the east on their camels, following a star till they find the Christ child. We know that story. And and what are the gifts they bring? Well, we know that too: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But there's a part of the story that none of us have heard. We've seen them arrive at the stable. We've seen them leave. But we do not know what happened when they presented their gifts. And if you listen very quietly and very carefully, you too will learn the secret of their gifts. Well, as we know from the story, over the hills and the deserts and the valleys and the mountains they came, following that star in the east that led them to that stable. And they arrived, people saw them come, people looked at their store, looked at them, whispered who they were. And as they alighted from their camels, one by one, to enter the stable, everyone pointed and watched. Well, you see, the first of the visitors was Gaspar. Oh, fine, resplendent in his velvets and furs, with glittering brooches of gems at his throat, at his waist. He was a wealthy man, and he carried in his hands a heavy box filled with gold, some of his finest treasure. And as he approached the door, he saw an angel. And the angel Gabriel looked at him and said, "What have you brought?" "I bring a fine gift of gold," he said to the angel. "I see. And is this gift the essence of yourself?" "But of course," said Gaspar, feeling the weight of his hands. "Then enter," said the angel, and opened the door and ushered him in. Well, fine, wealthy man of prestige that he was, he'd never felt such a presence when he entered the stable. And there were the mother and the father sitting in the shadows with just the lamplight glittering in the eyes of the small babe in the manger there. The angel and the animals in the background. But he felt that sense of awe. And he carried that box. And as he approached the Christ child, he looked up, and there in his hands was not the box of gold that he had brought, not the finely crafted wood with the brass hinges, but a hammer. Its handle as long as a man's arm, its head is heavy lead and scarred. And he starts up, he says, "What? I've been tricked. What is this?" "None, no trick," said the angel, "but that of your own greed." "What, you speak in riddles at a time like this?" Gaspar asked the angel. "You see," said Gabriel, "you have taken the greed that you have for your wealth, and you have beaten your enemies into submission. You have stolen from those who are poor and living in hovels in order to make wealthy mansions for yourself. You have turned your enemies into your slaves and your friends into your servants." Gaspar knew the angel spoke the truth. And so he turned to leave. And the angel said, "No, no, 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 you must leave your gift." I can't leave this," said Gaspar. "It's heavy. The child could bruise himself as he tries to pick it up or touch it." "That," said Gabriel, "is a worry you must leave to heaven. You must leave your gift if you would be free and clean." Well, Gaspar then moved forward and lowered to his knees and left the hammer at the foot of the Christ child. And as he rose to leave and he exited the door of the stable, others saw him with sort of a lightness to his fingers and a smile on his face that they did not see as he had entered previously. And that is the story of Gaspar. The next to approach the door was Melchoir. Ah, the learned Melchoir. He was not as resplendent as Gaspar, for he wore the darker robes of a scholar. He had the long beard and the lines in his face that bespoke of one who had searched for elusive truth his entire life. As he approached the stable door, he carried in his hands, of course, frankincense in a beautiful silver flask. And as he approached the door, the angel, of course, said to him, as he had said to Gaspar, "What have you brought?" "I bring a gift of frankincense, some of the finest and richest in my treasure store." "Well," said the angel, "this gift must be the essence of yourself." "It is," said Melchoir. "And if so, then enter," the angel said, "and we shall see." Now, the learned Melchoir had been in the presence of great wisdom and dignitaries all his life, but was not prepared for that sense of wonder that he experienced as he came in and he knelt in the straw and began to shuffle forward, and he pulled out of his pocket in his robe the beautiful silver flask. And as he went to leave that, he started and sputtered as he saw this rude clay vessel in his hands, and he pulled the stopper and sniffed, and he says, "What foul magic is this? This is not what I brought." Gabriel asked him, "And what is it?" "It's vinegar," he spat like a curse. "So it is, and so it shall be," said the angel. "You have brought the bitterness of your soul. You have brought those long-held grudges and resentments, those embers of anger that you have fanned into flames of rage, the alienation and the animosity of those that you have spent a lifetime competing with." Melchoir knew the angel spoke the truth. And he went to take the flask and put the stopper back in and put it in the folds of his robe. and began to sidle out. And the angel said, wait, 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 wait. You have to leave your gift. You can't go now. I can't leave this here, he said. Not at the feet of love and innocence. This is vile and bitter stuff. What if the child should touch it to his lips? That, said Gabriel, is a worry you must leave to heaven. You must leave your gift here if you would be clean. So Melchior also dropped to his knees and shuffled through the straw and left his gift, the rude flask full of vinegar, at the foot of the Christ child's manger. And as he left the manger, as he left and went outside and saw people, they said his face looked like that of a young man who was looking upon horizons that he'd never seen before. And he greeted each as someone he had long wished to see, but had missed. And that is the story as far as we know it. But there is yet one more visitor. That is Balthazar. He walked as one, as tall as an oak tree, his shoulders as broad as an oaken beam. He was the leader of armies, the scourge of walled cities. He was one born to battle as a warrior and a leader. Even he, bringing his gift to the door, stopped. And we know, of course, what the angel asked him. And as he spoke with the angel, others said, look, even the great Balthazar does obeisance before the king. But we know the angel asked him, have you a gift? I do, said Balthazar, as he held aloft this beautiful brass-bound box full of, as he told the angel, myrrh, some of the finest booty of my boldest conquests. I see, said the angel, and is your gift the essence of yourself? Why, of course it is, said Balthazar. Well, said the angel, then let us see. And he opened the door and let Balthazar in. And he too, having been around strong, powerful people his entire life, aged and finely wrought warriors, was not prepared for the sense of awe that washed over him. And he too fell to his knees as he shuffled forward and had his hand on the handle of the box that he wished to leave at the Christ child's feet. He started and looked up, and there in his hand was not the brass-bound box and its handle, but his spear, the lamplight glistening off of the shaft and the steely tip. What is this? He asked. That, said the angel Gabriel, is the essence of yourself. What are you talking about? Said Balthazar. I will teach you to jest at a time like this. It's not the gift that I brought. It is, said the angel, the essence of yourself, as you have fought enemy upon enemy, stronger than the last, as you tried to be stronger than they were, to move your armies forward into conquest, and then one more conquest after another, after another. You have turned your soul into a spear and a weapon. Balthazar heard these words. He said, you angels, you know nothing of this world. Do you think I like to fight? Right now, even my men are gathering and amassing forces against our enemies who are preparing to invade and attack us. We must gather more people and more weapons and more, said the angel. More than what? Why, more than they have, more than we have now, more than the other our enemies have. And, interrupted the angel, what then? Will they not also need more? Will this stop? The words did battle in Balthazar's soul with 100 years of warrior instinct, he knew the angel spoke rightly. He says, I can't give this up. My people are dependent upon me to help them defend themselves. If I do this, our enemies will conquer us. Well, said the angel, that is a possibility, but your way is a certainty of spears. You must leave your gift if you would be whole. Balthasar's hand on that spear. He paused. You could see the battle going on inside. And he released his hand and let the spear drop to the floor. And the angel released a long-held breath. Balthasar said, it's not safe to leave this here. What if the child should touch it? It could pierce his flesh. It could harm him. That, said the angel, is a worry you must leave to heaven. You have left your gift at the feet of the Christ child, and now you are clean. Well, and they say too that as Balthasar exited the stable, that others saw him go to one and to the next and to the next of those who waited outside and embrace them as long friends that he was so eager to see. And so you have listened well. You now know the secret of the gifts. You now know what has happened with these things, and you too can leave your long-held secrets, pain, bitterness, disappointments at the feet of the Christ child this holy season that comes upon us. Well, and you ask, what of the gifts, the hammer and the vinegar and the spear? Well, you see, there's another story with those that takes place on a hill outside of Jerusalem many years later. But that's a worry that can be left to heaven, as only heaven can take that upon itself.
Thank you, Adrian. Another story showing how the distant past can speak to the present. All right. I am now going to turn the mic over to my dear friend Dana Sherry. And Tail Spinners has had quite a number, several different hosts over our almost 30-year history. And Dana is the newest co-host. And we're so thrilled that she's joined us in keeping the swap going. So Dana, take it away.
Thank you, Liz. And yeah, we want to take a moment to honor our founding, the woman who founded our swap, one of the women who founded our swap, who has led us for over 25 years. As this month, our fearless Sally Holzman is becoming a listening member of the group. And so I would like to invite, if all of us were to share our stories and our memories of the wonderful times we spent with Sally, with the stories, with the impact that Tail Spinners has had on our lives, we'd be here for a very, very long time. So I would like to invite you to put a note in the chat if you have something to share. And we'll have a couple of stories that we'll share now. And I want to note and say thank you, Sally, for all the kindness that you've shown for beginning Storytellers. The very first story I ever heard was 16 years ago in the Arinda Library at Tail Spinners. And you were there when I told my first story. You were the one who gave me the advice I needed to get past those very rough moments that I hope we all have as we're starting out. So I want to say thank you for that. And I also want to open up the floor to share with two other storytellers who have been part of the journey over the years, Kirk Waller and then Jean Ellison. So if I can invite Kirk to join me.
Thank you, Dana. What a great honor and privilege it is just to share a word or two. I remember so well one of my first earliest storytelling experiences was because Sally invited me to tell spinners. It was probably, I don't know, 20 something years ago. And and you were so influential in kind of getting me started and providing me the opportunity. And one thing I got to tell you, if you want to hear someone say good job or just pat you on the back, don't ask Sally to hear your story. If you want someone to tell you the truth, to tell you in a loving way, though, always careful, always thoughtful, but very honest and very genuine, then talk to Sally. She's given me not only some of the best advice, because when we taught storytelling, or I taught storytelling at Stagebridge, just not only in storytelling, but in running the class and different suggestions about different things that might come up. But I have to tell you, one of my best memories and one of my best things I want to thank you for, Sally, has nothing to do with storytelling. One time after one of the classes at Stagebridge, we went out to lunch and we were just hanging out. And Sally was concerned about me because she knew my story, that my wife had passed away, that I had two little boys at home. And she was worried about me. And she wanted to make sure that there was someone out there for me and that I was looking, right? And what was I doing about looking? And you need the need to find someone, right? And so we had such just a great heart to heart. And I think I may have been seeing someone at that time, but I wasn't serious. But as Sally knows, and most of you all know, I did take her advice. I found a wonderful woman. And I like to think that was in part because of Sally's encouragement and advice and direction. So that's all I want to say. Thank you so much for everything, Sally. Wonderful. Love you.
Thank you, Kirk. It's true. It's easy to get caught up in the stories, but there's so much more. It goes beyond goes beyond the tales. And I would also like to invite Jean Ellison to share some of her stories of Sally.
There we are. Oh, I feel like a beginner tonight on this quest to get into the program tonight. Sally is the kind of person who you just don't want to be without. Whether it's telling stories outdoors at the Blake Gardens in Kensington, or sitting around the table, or being on a committee, or just hanging out and having a cup of tea. Sally is the kind of person that you just want to hang out with. And I love the way she would tell her personal stories, so rich and meaningful and respectful, always respectful, but always with a little gleam in her eye, She's been a role model for so many of us through the story swap and through TELLABRATIONs and helping out at the festivals and just being Sally. What's not to love about Sally Holzman? Thank you for all of your years of helping with this program. And I look forward to hearing more and more Sally stories. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you, Jean. And I would like to invite everyone just for a moment to unmute yourselves so that we can all say out loud, thank you, Sally. So on the count of 3, if we could unmute. 1, 2, 3. Thank you, Sally.
Wow.
Thank you.
And it would not be a complete honoring of our beloved Sally if it didn't involve a story in your honor. And so Jean has courageously offered, well, graciously, I'm not sure what the right word, but has offered to share a story dedicated to Sally. And I should give Jean a quick introduction. That she has been many of you may know her as the 2024 SAC Regional Gem. But she has been telling stories a lot longer than that. She says she's been telling stories all her life, but telling them on purpose for the last 25 years. So tonight, I think we're going to hear a story on purpose from Jean.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I was thinking of so many stories that I could share, but I want to tell you a dog story, and I want to dedicate this to Sally because I know she's a dog person. Growing up in Lafayette many, many years ago, we had animals. We had lots and lots of animals. We were lucky enough to have horses. We had dogs. My little brother had a baby calf. He rescued a armadillo. Not an armadillo. One of those things that gets run over by the cars sometimes. Possums. Oh, possum. Anyway, we had lots and lots of animals, but there were always lots of dogs, different kinds of dogs. And there was one really special dog. Ivan was his name. He showed up one day, just like he'd lived with us forever. We thought, my goodness, he had a name, he had a tag, so my mother would call his owner and say, well, Ivan showed up here, and it's so strange because it's like he's lived here all his life. And she said, he's like that. Mom said, I'll bring him home. Just let me know where you live. I'll take him home. So Mom took him home, and within a day and a half, Ivan was back. Mom called Ivan's owner and said, Ivan's back. What should I do? And she said, well, that's exactly how Ivan came to us. He just showed up one day, and he stayed with us for quite some time. And if you have room in your heart, in your home for another dog, it seems like Ivan has chosen you. Well, Ivan was a favorite dog in our household. My mother, with 5 children to raise, didn't have time to exercise him like maybe she should have, but she'd put him in the car and drive up over Snake Hill Road and out to a dirt road, and Ivan was in the backseat of the car. She'd let him out, and she'd drive along the dirt road, and Ivan would run along beside the car and get his exercise. Very, very clever. Now, he had a peculiar interest in Western movies. And it happened that every Friday night, he would go down to the neighbor's house at the bottom of Stowe Lane and scratch at the back door, and they'd let him in, and Ivan would prance in and jump up on the couch and put his chin on the sofa rest and watch Gunsmoke. He loved Gunsmoke. And when Gunsmoke was over, he would leave. Oh, he would leave. That was his ritual. And everybody in the neighborhood knew Ivan. Everybody knew his story. And he was allowed to go watch Gunsmoke without any problem whatsoever. But one day, Ivan didn't show up. And Mom was worried, and well, we all were worried. We loved Ivan. Ivan had been there for years with us. And then my mom gets a phone call and says, do you happen to have a dog named Ivan? And Mom says, well, yes, we do. Well, he showed up at our house, and it's the strangest thing. It's like he's lived with us forever. And Mom said, well, you could try bringing him back, but I have a feeling he will be returning to you because that's his way. And he was the kind of a dog that shared himself widely and lovingly for many, many years. And we have a new dog, and I know how Sally loves dogs, so I thought I would share my story of Ivan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean. A nice, heartwarming story about a dog. I love dogs. Thank you.
What's not to like about a dog?
I know. Okay, so our next storyteller is Nick Smith. He's a teller of historical tales for adult audiences and traditional tales for all ages. For many years, Nick was the leader of the San Gabriel Valley Storytellers in LA County. Nick became an active member of Inland Valley Storytellers in 2004, and with his many years of experience organizing storytelling events, he helped IVS grow and prosper. He's been a teller at IVS concerts since the TELLABRATION of 2004, and I forgot to add his spotlight. There he is. So welcome, Nick, and tell us a story.
All right. Now, when you think of a folk tale, you think of something like long, long ago or once upon a time. But I'm going to tell you one where the date of it is known because it was kept in the town records. And for the people who lived there, it was a true story. You see, it was in the year 1284. June of that year that this story happened, at least as far as what was told there. And I'm going to tell it to you from the viewpoint of someone who might have been there. Do I know when it happened? Of course I know when it happened. It was after the priest told us to be rid of the cats, for they were devil's animals. And when we asked what would keep the rats and mice out of our cupboards, he said, God will provide. What God provided was rats and mice, by the dozens, by the hundreds, by the thousands. Soon it became as if a plague on feet running through the town. And soon we had to use the cloth that we made to cover the beds of our children, to keep them from being bitten and molested at night.
Goodness.
And soon
I'm sorry.
the barges that came along the river to pick up the cloth that we were selling
So far.
were afraid to stop there because
What?
no one wants rats and mice aboard their barges. No one wants to carry a plague of such things from one town to another along the river. And so we had no sales of the great quantities of cloth we made. We still made it because that was our way. But we had to spend our money on feeding our families. Well, we tried to get dogs to catch the rats and mice, but they were less efficient at it. And the advantage of a cat, you see, is that it catches the young rats before they breed. And so for every rat that a cat catches, there are 10 that will not be there the next season. And so it kept getting worse. But one day it happened. You see, it wasn't the music that we heard at first. It was the sound of birds, birds singing, birds from more than one variety, all singing as if they were in one gigantic flock together. And we looked out into the streets, and there coming through the gate was a strange-looking man playing a flute, and over his head circled birds of a dozen different varieties. Well, once he came through the gate, he stopped playing, and they flew off in all different directions. Well, this caught everyone's attention, and those of us not busy went out to see what was going on. And this man, this piper, he said, "I hear that you have a problem with rats and mice." And we said, "Well, of course, of course." Being a businessman myself, I said, "It's ruining us, this plague of rats." And he said, "Tell you what would you pay me to rid you of these rats and mice?" And everyone laughed because we had tried everything possible to get rid of the rats and mice. And I spoke up and said, "We would pay you 1,000 guilders to rid us of these mice and these rats, to restore our town." And he said, "Done. I'll make you such a deal. You'll be rid of rats by the end of the week." And he turned and walked back out the gates of the town. Well, we were too stunned to even laugh, but a couple of days later, he came back and started looking around the town, and he measured out the streets, and he looked at the docks where the barges used to be. And he said, "Yes, yes, this will work just fine. I'll be back tonight," and walked out the gates again. Well, it didn't occur to us, to any of us, to follow him out the gates. I mean, he was clearly quite mad, but there was how he charmed the birds. Well, that night it happened. And the first sound we heard was not the sound of his flute, but the sound of tiny claws scratching along the cobblestones and the squeaking and chittering of rats and mice. And when we looked out the windows, we saw him walking by, playing his flute, and there, behind him and around him and in front of him, were more mice and rats than we had ever understood were there. They came out of every nook and cranny all through the town. And they moved with him as he walked down to the docks by the river. And as he played and continued to play, they ran to the edge of the docks and jumped into the water and began to swim out into the middle of the river. Now, the Weser is not a small river. Rats and mice are small. And as they got to the middle of the river and grew tired, they began to struggle and to sink and to drown. And by the evening's end, there was no sign of a rat or a mouse anywhere in the town. Well, we rushed out to thank him, and he said, "Now, where's my money?" And all the businessmen in town spoke up. "It will take us time to get the money. We have to sell the cloth. We have to let the bargemen know to come back and pick up the cloth." And he said, "I want to be paid. I don't want words from you about when and I will be paid. I want to be paid." And I spoke up and said, "Look, we have cloth here. It will sell, but it will take a little bit of time to get the money. You've asked us for a lot of money." And he said, "I did not ask, you offered." "Well, yes, and we can pay you that money, but it will take us as much as 3 months because we have to sell the cloth." 3 months? You have 3 days to pay me, or I'll take what's worth it to me. "But we can't sell the cloth in that amount of time. It isn't possible." "Make it possible." And he walked out the town gates and left us all talking, but there was no way to rush. We had to send messages up and down the river. We had to send messages to the other towns that it was safe for the barges to come again and to bring money to buy the cloth. In 3 days, the messages had barely reached other towns. Surely that there was no way to get the barges faster. And we tried to explain that to him. We could give him what amounted to a small amount in good faith so that he could trust us until the money arrived. And he said, "You offered me money that you don't have. How can I trust you to have it in 3 months? It's all that we can do." And he said, "No, but it's all that you would wish to do." And he walked out the gates of the town once again. Well, we were all sad, but we were trying to do the right thing. We were trying to find a way to raise the money to pay him. And we talked about it the rest of the day, but no solution had made its way clear to us. It wasn't the music from his flute that we heard. It was the sound of children's voices. That night, we heard the voices of children running up and down the cobblestones of the streets. This seemed odd because all of them would be at home, eating or getting ready for bed, but when we looked, our children were nowhere in our homes. They were all out in the streets. Every child old enough to walk or run had somehow gotten outside. And we had a horrified thought. What if he did to them what he had done to the rats and mice? But the sounds of laughter and footfalls we heard were not going toward the docks, not going toward the river. They were all going toward the gates of the town. And even though we all thought of it, somehow none of us stepped outside our homes to follow. We heard the sounds of the children's voices going out through the gates of the town and dwindle, and then there was silence. And only when there was silence could any of us leave our homes to try and find out what was going on. And we ran to the gates and saw nothing. We checked with the different families, and between us, 130 children were gone. We sent word out asking for word of this piper, this flutist, to see if we could contact him. By the time 3 months had gone by, we had the money. We were ready to pay him. But he never came back to us. We kept the money for a year, 2 years, 4 years, and it was at that time we knew that the children would not be back. And so we used that money to pay for a stained glass window for the church so that no one would forget the story, and that priest would never forget the cause of the story. He no longer banned cats. He understood, but it was 130 children too late. We kept the records in the town journals. We spread the word everywhere we could. We heard back one story that a king far to the east seemed to have a lot of children growing up in one of the towns that he was trying to settle, but we never heard back when we tried to send word if these were the right ones, if these were our children. But we didn't forget. We never forgot. How can you forget the loss of your children? And so it was that in Hamelin in Germany, this story was told and retold in many forms as if it was a folk tale, but it's in the town records. June of 1284. And until the 30 Years' War, that stained glass window survived in the church. It was destroyed in the fighting with the Swedish army. But people had commented on it and travelers had talked about it. And when they asked, they were told the story of why it was there. So it was. You've heard versions of the story, but I've made it as true as I can, as true a version as I can of the tale of the Pied Piper of Hamelin.
Thank you, Nick. That was a great version of the Pied Piper. Thank you so very much for sharing that. Okay, so that is the last storyteller. I want to thank everybody for wonderful, wonderful stories and everybody who came to listen to them. And I loved looking at the chat. I do believe there is a way you can save the chat, those of you who told stories, if you haven't had a chance to look at the comments. Trying to remember how to do that. Does anybody know how to save the chat?
It has to be enabled for us to be able to save it. There's usually oh yeah, at the very top of the chat where there's three little dots, you can, the pull down menu comes up and you can do save chat.
Oh, I see it. Yeah, the little dots and there's save chat.
Mhm.
So those of you who want to save the chat can do that and take a look at it. We've got excellent comments there. So very glad that you all joined us here. Let's get Liz on here too. And thank you for working with me to do this. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. I just think, and I want to thank the Storytelling Association of California once again. You know, and acknowledge that Sarah Armstrong, our chair of the board of SAC, is here. Thank you, Sarah, for being here. And that through these joint Zoom telebrations that SAC has been doing ever since as John was saying, since the pandemic began, has really been a wonderful way to bring storytellers and storytelling groups from across this huge state that we have, who don't get to meet each other in person, don't get to know each other always, to really bring us together in a way we never have before. And so I'm just so glad to be part that Tailspinners jumped in to be part of that this year.
Yeah, I'm glad to. And I put the links in again in the chat section, the links to both SAC, their donation page, and NSN, their donation page, if you're so inclined to support their good work. Okay, so I think I'm going to end the recording.
Mhm.